So hello, good afternoon. I'm Amy Mazzola. Welcome to our TCF 2.2 webinar on user interface demos and best practices. I'm going to hand you over to my colleague Gosha shortly, but before I do, Gosha will share with you our agenda and introduce all of our speakers. But I just wanted to let you know that we are live and we will be recording this session, which we will share alongside with the decks after the website on our website. After the event on our website, sorry. And also this event is live, so please do use the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen to ask any questions, and Gosha will take the presenters through those at the end of the session. So over to you, Gosha.
Thank you very much, Amy, for the introduction. So I would like to also welcome everyone who has decided to join us today, as well as our speakers for their time and the opportunity for showing their new TCF version 2.2 CMP UIs. So I would like to welcome Jeff Wheeler from Didomi and Augustine Perez from Sibo. So thank you guys for joining us. May I please the next slide? Amy? Okay, thank you. Okay, so here's the agenda for today. We'll start with the quickly reminder about the implementation timeline. Later on, we'll quickly summarize the upcoming CMP changes that are going to be a little bit more elaborated by our today guests. Later on, it will be presentation of the new CMP UIs that are going to be presented by the speakers to show how their companies have decided to implement the new changes. And at the very end of this webinar, there is going to be a Q&A session. So if you have any questions, please use the Q&A option to ask your questions, and we will try to answer them at the end. So to begin with the timeline, yes, so we have decided to extend the deadline to implement TCF 2.2 as a result of the feedback received from the TCF participants, as they needed a bit more time to implement everything to be ready for the new TCF policies. What is worth noting that all the TC strings created under TCF version 2.1 before November 20th remain valid. However, after November 20th, it is only possible to create TC strings under TCF 2.2. So please make sure to remember November 20th, as it is a deadline for all the participants to implement the required changes. Also, there is new global vendor list that might be useful to create the new improved CMP UIs, as well as the translations. May I please the next slide? Yeah, so now quickly the reminder about the changes that are relevant from the CMP point of view. So we wanted to make the TCF version 2.2 more user-friendly and more transparent to the end user, so that the standard text has changed to become it more understandable to the end users. We also decided to remove legal text and replace it with more detailed user-friendly descriptions that are accompanied by the illustrations that are based on the real use cases on how the TCF participants use the TCF purposes. The second new thing is the requirement about the number of vendors. So right now, may I please the previous one? Thank you. So yeah, the requirement regarding the number of vendors. In the first layer, there has to be the total number of vendors that are seeking consent or based the processing of data on the legitimate interest. In the secondary layer of the CMP UI, there has to be the number of vendors based on the per purpose basis. So here's the difference. May I now please the next slide? Thank you. So right now also the text that is in the CMP UI has to be a bit more comprehensive. We now require from vendors more information that needs to be afterwards disclosed in the CMP UI to the end users. Currently, we ask vendors to provide us the categories of data collected and proceed by them, retention periods on the per purpose basis, as well as if a vendor is using the legitimate interest to process data. Also, the link to the explanations to its legitimate interest at stake explanation, for example, a bookmark in the vendor's privacy policy. At the very end, we improved our policies regarding the withdrawal of consent. So right now, the end user must have the possibility to easily resurface CMP by, for example, a link or a call to action that is really easily accessible. And also what is important, if a CMP offers the possibility to consent to all, with the withdrawal, there should be equal button like withdraw to all, just to make it as easy as possible and equally equal easy. So right now, I will give the floor to our speakers. So the first one, I would like to ask Jeff from Didomi to present their slides.
Great. Thanks, Joshua. Let me share my screen. All right. Just confirm. Can everyone see my screen? Great. All right. Well, thanks for the invite. Just a quick introduction of myself. So I'm Jeff Wheeler. I'm the Vice President of Product at Didomi. I actually live in North America, but I've been building CMP products with Didomi and various companies for about a decade. So a little bit about me and my experience. So for today, we'll go over, obviously an introduction of Didomi ourselves, the history of Didomi and the IAB, a quick demo and some comparisons of, our different versions of 2.1 and 2.2. So for everyone on the call not familiar with Didomi, we're a Paris-based CMP. We're one of the highest performing CMPs in the market. We're Google CMP certified, ISO certified. You can see here on the screen that our opt-in rates and client retention are extremely high, especially for a SaaS company. You can see in the bottom right corner some of the different companies we work with. On average, we're collecting 2 billion consent records a quarter, which puts us into a significant amount of web traffic we actually see worldwide, seeing a Didomi consent experience. Again, I mentioned we're Google CMP certified, which is a big part of the TCF now. With their announcement a couple months, we work really closely with G2 and our high performer there as well. So a little history with Didomi and the IAB. We were one of the first CMPs to originally integrate with the IAB and the TCF. We worked with many of the subgroups across the different organizations, and our chief privacy officer, Tomas, is one of the chairs of the IAB's working groups for the DPA outreach program. So as we hop into a quick demo of the changes that we have, I'll show you first the console and then go into some comparisons of Didomi's 2.1 versus 2.2 experience. Where we like to start is really kind of identifying who are the vendors we're working with. We've obviously seen with some of the updates with the IAB that the amount of vendors publishers are working with, or our customers are working with have been extremely high, and utilizing our tools or scanning technologies allows us to work with our customers to help reduce the number of vendors to make a better end user experience for our customers. So you can see down here on the bottom right corner, example of a scan from a publisher website. Each one of those icons represents a different third party that's on a website. It could come from being directly installed or put on the website, or it could be fired like through a piggyback, sharing data across the different technologies. With this list, that again allows our customers to identify those vendors, and then they can use our smart vendor list, which allows them to manage the number of vendors that show up on the notices. So it'll automatically scan, populate our notices, and put the number of vendors on those lists. So this is where we kind of begin with the beginning stages of setting up a consent notice, especially with the IAB standards. In terms of what the new backend of our console will look like, there's kind of two parts of it. Obviously, we're supporting the 2.1 framework, and really we're just giving a simple button that will allow our customers to update to the 2.1 framework. In parallel between now and the November 20th deadline that was mentioned, we'll obviously allow our customers. We're not going to force the customers to make that full upgrade to 2.1 until the November 20th deadline, to which that grace period will be over. Obviously, part of the reason we're doing that is some of the vendors working with the IAB. There's still some confusion there that we're working with. So that's the approach we're taking. Additionally, and I'll show this here on the demo of the different layers and the experiences here shortly. Displaying the number of vendors, on the first layer is part of the requirements. We've done some research with our customers, with the end users, and there's still some confusion about, do we display all the number of vendors being shown on notice, or do we break it down by IAB vendors and non-IAB vendors? So by default, we're going to recommend that we just display all vendors, but we do have the option of breaking it down by both IAB vendors and non-IAB vendors, which I can show you here shortly as part of the notice. Secondly, our platform supports multiple channels of consent, and all of these will be part of our IAB solution. Obviously, web is the big one that most are familiar with, but also AMP websites. Mobile apps will have a 2.2 solution, as well as our CTV native solution and web SDK solutions for CTV. So, and then lastly, this is another example of the smart vendor list. If we find a vendor that maybe is not being matched up to the global vendor list, is an IAB vendor, we do have the flexibility to match that up to the IAB vendor list to make sure that the consent string is correct. The information displayed on the first layer, the second and third layers are also correct in terms of disclosure on the notices. So just a quick comparison of what 2.1 for the Didomi platform versus the 2.2 comparison will look like. So here's an example of our current 2.1 layer that's out there. You can see this meets the current guidelines. We notify of the different purposes and the messaging. We also have the ability to continue without agreeing, which is up in the top right corner. This is also flexible in terms of different geos and region requirements. So for instance, in Italy, you have to have the cross button in the top right corner, which can be added as well as part of the different requirements from a regulatory perspective, outside of the IAB. For 2.2, so here's an example of adding the number of partners that work here with it. So again, the basic text is still being shown. We've got the purposes down on the bottom that you can see the button highlighted in green there shows the partners. That button will then open up our third layer that will disclose the different third parties that are being utilized on the consent notice. I mentioned in a couple of slides back, also we can break this out by IAB vendors. So there could be 12 partners, and it could say 4 IAB vendors. And then when you get to the third layer, we'll obviously disclose which one are IAB vendors and which ones are not. So as we get into the second layer, again, 2.1 versus 2.2, here's the current second layer where we have the purposes, kind of the standard layout text that we've seen through different CMPs around that second layer. The updated layer, obviously we've now added the vendors and purposes to that layer under each one of the purposes. So again, if you click on the 2 vendors, the 9 vendors highlighted in green, it will open up a little interstitial like you see in the bottom right corner that will disclose the 9 vendors. You can see the 4 IAB vendors are also being disclosed, highlighting which ones are IAB in bold and which ones are not. All right. So again, the second layer here, and as we go into the second layer again, reading in the different bodies of text from the global vendor list, the third version of the global vendor list. Here is that text that historically, if we go back here, if you see this little eye icon after presented to you, that's how you have typically seen that in the past. Now we're displaying that fully based off the information that we're getting from the global vendor list. And then also as well, we're showing the different consent and legitimate interest options and what vendors may fall under that specific purpose as well. So just giving you a little more granularity there around those. As we get into the third layer, which typically is our vendor layer, you can see here again in 2.1, we've got the different data types, data processing based on consent in our old 2.1 layer. And as we go into the 2.2 layer, I'll kind of break this down into 3 separate slides as we're going through these. But you've got the data processing and the purposes and the data categories there as well. And then you can see in the bottom right corner is an example of Google advertising in this case on how they may use legitimate interest. and the way it manages it and the links to the privacy policy, again, which is coming from the global vendor list. The other option is adding in, or the other part of this is also adding in the data categories, which we're displaying here in the third layer, where those are broken down. We're given those definitions and that data provided by the global vendor list. Again, also, based off the translations from the global vendor list, all of this is translated, via the CMP and based off the browser's language. So, if a Spanish browser comes in and see this, all this will be provided in the language of the user's browser. And then lastly is the data processing times. Again, Gosha mentioned this in her presentation, but here's the data processing times, the retention time that is used for each one of the data categories mentioned above as an added feature of what 2.2 will look like. So again, kind of quick, but that kind of highlights the Didomi perspective in terms of our solution towards 2.2 and how we're moving forward. In terms of timelines, this is actually in our testing right now. We expect this to be out in sometime early September to mid-September, once it's out of development, and we'll have all the follow-up documentation and work done for any possible new customers or current customers that are curious.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Right now, I'd like to ask Agustin Perez from Sibo to present the slides.
Okay, you have to give me permission to share the screen now. I've got it. Thank you. Okay, can you see my screen? Okay, thank you. So Sibo consent platform. This is the overview of what I'm going to present. First, a little bit about Sibo, then what's new in relation with the TCF version 2.2, and also one slide what's new on our CMP also for this release. Thanks very much everyone for attending, and I proceed to start. So Sibo consent platform, it's a platform that it's delivering CMP for all platforms. So we started from the very beginning providing the CMP for web and app, Android and iOS, but we quickly proceed to give it also for connected TV and for hybrid TV, HBB TV. We have been also certified by Google recently, and of course we have different partners that trust in us, like LG or the main broadcasters of Spain, some broadcasters in Germany also, and UK, and apps and webs. What defines our CMP is that it's flexible, so that we have a roadmap, but it's rather flexible, that we adapt to the needs of our customers, and we put in our roadmap what our customers need. It's as I mentioned, multi-device. We have a configurator. You can do it yourself if you want, but we believe that not so many people knows about the legal aspects, and also what's better to configure for their needs. So we are keen to help in the configuration and in the day life of the product. It's customizable. We can add partners outside of the TCF. We can customize also look and feel, color, fonts, and of course the legal part of it. And as I mentioned, we are keen to provide a detail and customer service. We have a dashboard, of course, too, so you can watch how your consents are evolving, and also test different scenarios with different look and feels mainly. We provide a wiki and a ticketing system as a repository for all the conversations that we have with our customers. So as I mentioned, we have a configurator available that can be managed together with your dedicated account manager to configure the legal, technical, or look and feel, and also during the product life cycle. Now, what's new in the TCF version 2.2? So a brief summary of what it's really impacting on the let's say the user interface. Some purposes have been eliminated in legitimate interest. The number of vendors should be displayed in the first layer and also in the purposes. The IB also provide a JSON file with the characteristics of the different vendors. That's important to decide which vendors the publisher should display, as the IB recommends reducing the number of vendors that are shown to the user. There is a new purpose 11. Changes in the text related to purposes data processing. So the data processing information is more understandable with examples, and more information about the data that the vendors process. There is also something that is not in the interface, which is the deprecation of the GetTC data, which is something important for the backend and how the CMP communicates with the publisher and with vendors. So basically, all the changes provide users with a greater control, offering more transparency and information and a user-friendly language, which is something that has been demanded by the market. So how we implemented these changes. For example, I will put some examples. So display the number of vendors. So for example, this is our banner for web. So we have already this link to the vendor list, and here we display the number in the same thing if you see it in mobile. Second thing, the new purpose that is displayed as one purpose more within the list of purposes. So for example, you can see here there is a scroll, so different purposes here, and we have click on the arrow to display what's inside the purpose, so the definition, and you can see here the number of vendors that take this purpose, and if you click on the arrow, you will see the partners, and if you click on the see examples, you will see some examples of what this means. Okay, the same thing in mobile. So it's here in mobile. So there are also the change, as I mentioned before. If you click on examples, you can see here examples of that describe what is the description of this purpose. So it's something that is closer to what a typical user may understand, and the same in mobile. There is also the possibility for publishers to set their own examples, although this is at their own risk. That means that as it's not a legal test that has been, let's say, approved by the framework, it's on your own risk that this test is correct. So that's why it's not recommended. And there is more information about the vendors and the data they process. So we classified here for the vendors in these items. So additional data process, device storage, data declaration, and data retention, both for web and mobile. This is similar to Smart TV and Hybrid TV. And if you just click on the arrows, you can see all the fields that are under these items. There are also this data declaration. That the data declaration, there are different items that can be also listed in the partners. So for each partner, you can see what's data declaration they do. Okay, this is something also new in web and mobile or smart TV and hybrid TV. And that was our summary about the TCF version 2.2, about our new changes. We've take advantage to release also multiple storage for HBBTB and CDB to include a wider range of TV devices. So the old devices have problems with if we manage them with only cookie or local storage or remote storage. So we include multiple storage. We've improved our web deployment to get improvements. So we have looked at the metrics that Google is taking into account and try to improve the load. Of course, Google certified the integration with the Google Consent Model. Include a more easy deployment of blocking scripts for the web vendors, and also different improvements of the interface for different platforms, especially for TV, which is something it's something that was also demanded to us. And that's all. Thank you very much, and we'll be glad to take some questions.
Thank you very much, Augustine. So yeah, right now we are going to have the Q&A session. For now, we don't have that many questions, but really, please feel free if you have any that you want to ask. So the first question is regarding deadline. Why is the new deadline just before Black Friday? This is a key advertising date for UK. So the new deadline was agreed within the TCF steering group. It was the common decision of all the participants from different markets. So yeah, it is just a consensus that has been found and voted by the steering group. Total number of IAB vendors, right? Okay, here maybe Augustine, you want to elaborate?
Yes, what we are doing is that we are including the total number of IB plus other vendors that are outside of the IB. And we are giving the recommendation to our publishers to try to decrease the number of vendors using the information that is provided in this JSON file that we are giving them in a more easy to watch or to work format, like an Excel or something similar. So they can pick a vendor, the vendors for the region or for the platform they are implementing, etc., etc.
Thank you. Jeff, do you want to add something or?
Yeah, I mean, I think to again go off what Augustine said, I mean, the reason that we're also showing total number of vendors by default versus just the IAB vendors is we're trying to make things as clear to that end user. The research that's come about is, if you say there's 4 vendors and then a user goes in and opens up that third layer and they see there's 50 vendors. Something is off there, and that really starts to at the end of the day, affects user trust. And I think we as an industry have kind of moved beyond just a compliance piece to also trying to provide this better experience for the users, being clear, concise to the user, and hence the reason we kind of made that approach of just showing all vendors instead of just IAB vendors.
Thank you. Just from IAB Europe side. As our guest said, basically it's about the transparency principle that is based in GDPR. The TCF policies require to display the total number of IAB vendors, but as a publisher, it is just wise to think how it looks like from the transparency point of view if you only display IAB vendors and not displaying the others. So it's actually up to the publisher to decide, but just the recommendation is to be as transparent as possible. Okay, the next one. What recommendation do Didomi and Sibo have for a number of vendors? What tools and methodology can help with reducing IAB, TCF, and Google vendors? So let's start again with Augustine.
Okay, yeah. What we recommend, I just mentioned a few things, a couple of things about that. So, for example, there are vendors that in the JSON of the vendors with their the features and definitions that they, for example, say that they only work for web or for app or for TV. So that's a first way to reduce the list. So if you are implementing web CMP, just you don't need the vendors that are only acting in apps or in television. The same thing for geos. So if you are, we find, for example, apps or webs or TVs that are working in a region, Spain, Germany, Sweden. So maybe that's another way. So if you don't need a technology that is not doesn't have a footprint in your geo, and then you can consider other fields, but we've seen that it's difficult. Like for example, if they have a transfer of data outside of the European Union, that's more a legal aspect. If you want to allow that or not, and what type of transfer, how it's done. But at least with these two segmentations, you can slightly reduce the list. And that's what we are recommending.
Okay, thank you. Jeff?
Yeah, Simon, it's a good question. It's really difficult to say, what is the exact number of vendors that you should have, because there's so many different impacts. There's KPI performance, there's there's how does it impact revenue, all those different types of things can impact that, right? But I think in general, similar to my last answer, right, at the end of the day, you're also worried about the user experience and what they're seeing, and if a user really cares about privacy and they go and see company A has 150 vendors and company B has 20 vendors, they're going to maybe question that and wonder, like, why is one company collecting so much more data on me than the other. So those are all different things to take into account. In terms of tools that you can use, though, like I kind of highlighted, Didomi's solution. We have a scanning ability, and what that scanning ability does is it allows you to identify the different third parties on your site. Not only identify them, but also, how did they get there? It's not always clear, with the amount, especially on websites. I think websites are unique compared to like app and CTV because, there's not as much dynamic things happening in terms of like piggybacking in particular. So if you're looking and all of a sudden you've got a Pinterest tag on your site, you don't know how it got there, having a tool that can identify that, call that out, so your teams can make the right decisions about whether that should be disclosed or not, whether that should be on the site. Like, those are important. And then the next step is, okay, I've got this, I've identified those tags. How do I make sure that my notices are updated with the correct vendors, with the correct tags? Because, there's certain brands, there's publishers that may be dealing with hundreds, if not thousands of notices at a time. And having a tool that can automate that can make sure the notices that are up to date, that have the correct, the correct vendors on there, are all really important in making sure that at the end of the day, that the right experience is shown, the right vendors are shown, and you're disclosing the right information to the end user.
Thank you very much. The next question, in the new vendor list, there are privacy URLs in the multiple languages. I didn't see how it was reflected in the demos. So again, guys, it's a question to both of you. So Augustine?
Yeah, what we are doing is that we are picking the language of the CMP that is displayed to the user, and we are coordinating the language of the CMP with the language of the privacy URL. And in case that there is the language is not available, so because there is, for example, only the English link, then we use by default the English link.
Okay, thank you, Jeff.
Yeah, so we're very similar. We identify the browser language of the user, and that's the language that we show, and then we'll assign the appropriate URL, and then within the setup of our notices, the user can set the default language that should be shown. So they can set it as English, they can set it as German, Italian, whatever it is. And so if that language is not supported, for instance, then we'll default to the default language as shown, and then pull in the correct information.
Okay, thank you. Is displaying the number of vendors also required in the secondary layer? Yes, but in the secondary layer, it's not the total number of vendors in general, but it's the number of vendors on a per purpose basis. So in the secondary layer, you need to display the number of vendors that are seeking consent based on like per purpose basis. So how many vendors are looking for the consent or per day processing activities based on legitimate interest according to like each purpose. And I think that's all. We don't have any more questions. So I would like to thank you, our speakers, for joining us today and for all the participants. I believe that if you have any more questions to Jeff or Augustine, just go reach out to them if you would like to find out more about their solution. And yeah, that's all. You will also find the recording of this webinar and the previous one that we had yesterday on our website, as well as all the new really useful TCF 2.2 resources. So please go check our websites if you need more information regarding the TCF. So thank you very much.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.